is Louise and I'm a registered dietitian and a member of the VHI Health Squad. And I'm here today to talk to you about general healthy eating, good nutrition, and to give you an idea of the kind of foods that we should all be trying to include in our diet every day to ensure that we're getting the best from our nutrition. So firstly, I would just like to point out that really we don't, as dietitians, encourage people to talk about good foods and bad foods, because really there's no food that doesn't have a place in a healthy, balanced diet. There certainly is room for birthday cake and special occasion foods and enjoying chocolate and sweets on occasions. But really it's the overall diet that we're concerned about. So rather than talking about good or bad foods, you could certainly have a good diet, and equally you could make changes if you feel that you have a bad diet, or certainly there's room for improvement there. So it's really looking at the kind of foods that we should be including, the quantities, how often, and making small changes that we can stick with, because we all know that it's hard to break a habit, and new habits can take quite a long time, up to 21 days to stick with. So if you're going to make some small changes, we'll have a chat through where you might go about doing that. In terms of the Irish Nutrition Guidelines, we tend to talk about groups of foods. So the guidelines for nutrition really are focused on eating a range of foods from different food groups in the diet, and not excluding anything or not having too much of anything to try and get the best balance. And the first food group is the very, very colourful one that I have here. Lots of different examples of fresh fruit and vegetables. And these foods are categorised into a group all on their own because they really have lots of benefits in terms of helping to reduce our risk of heart disease, to protect us against developing certain types of cancers, and also really good foods for helping us to manage weight. So really the guidelines are that we should be eating about 7 portions of fruit and vegetables every day. So you may be familiar with the 5 a day guideline, but in fact now it's even increased to 7. And we know that from Irish studies, on average, Irish people are currently eating between 2.5 to 3 portions a day. So I think probably for all of us, there's room for improvement there. It doesn't really matter what kind of fruits and vegetables you include. You can include fresh, frozen, and tinned, are really handy to have on standby. Also dried fruit as well is a good source of nutrition. So really, in terms of the foods that you see here, try and include something at breakfast time, maybe some fruit or berries on your porridge, trying to include something at lunchtime, salad vegetables with your lunch, or a homemade vegetable soup, and again in the evening time to include lots of these foods at dinner time. If you look down at your plate, it's a good idea to see a rainbow of colour. So if about half of your plate is made up of fruit and vegetables, probably vegetables when it's coming to dinner time, that's a really good way to suggest that perhaps you're getting there in terms of the quantities that we should be eating for good health. They're also extremely high in fibre, and fibre is very important for our gut, for the development of good gut bacteria, and also to help reduce the risk of constipation, and can also help to reduce the risk of bowel cancer and other bowel conditions later in life. So fruit and vegetables then are something we really should all be eating lots and lots of. Also then, if we move on from the fruit and vegetables, the next group of foods I have here are the whole grain carbohydrates. And again, we're going to talk about fibre here because these are really a great source of fibre, particularly the wholemeal and whole grain varieties. And that's why I've really focused on those. So this is where we get a lot of our energy from. So the more physically active you are, the more of these foods and portions of these foods you should be including in your diet. So you can see here I've got some brown pasta, brown rice, whole grain breads, some potatoes in their skin, small baby potatoes, and some whole grain breakfast cereals. So these foods are probably quite the staple foods that we all tend to have at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And again, by making the healthier choices within those food groups, you're going to get more benefits in terms of nutrition. So the higher fibre varieties are the less processed foods. They're going to be better for your digestive system, better for your overall health, higher in nutritional value as well. So certainly try and include those as often as possible. The more active you are, the more of these foods you need to include. So certainly if you're watching your weight, you just need to keep an eye on the portion sizes. And again, the portions of these foods would not be huge. So in terms of rice and pasta, keep an eye on the portion size, use smaller plates for dinner, and again, filling up with lots of vegetables as well as your carbohydrates is a good idea. The next group of foods then are the dairy foods, and I have some milk here, a selection of different cheeses and some yogurt. And these foods are grouped together when we talk about nutrition because they are all really good sources of calcium and probably the best source of calcium in our diet, and also really good sources of protein. So every day we need to be including about 3 servings of these foods every day. So if you go for low-fat milk or regular milk, there's no difference in terms of the calcium content. So you can make a choice there. Low-fat milk is going to be better in terms of the calorie, it's going to have a lower calorie content and it's going to be lower in fat. So these foods are all good sources of calcium. If you cook with them, it doesn't affect the calcium. So if you're making some pizza and you're grating some cheese on top, if you're making a lasagna with the cheese sauce, all of that is going to add to your calcium intake. If you stir some yogurt through a curry to make it a bit milder for the children in your house, again, that's a really good source of adding calcium to the meal. And if you're using milk in cooking, again, it doesn't affect the calcium content. So try and include these foods 3 times a day to meet your calcium needs. Also really good sources of vitamin A and protein. And some of these foods are also fortified with vitamin D. And vitamin D we talk about as the sunshine vitamin. So here in Ireland, unfortunately, we don't get enough vitamin D because of the action of the sunlight on our skin. Between March and October, I should say between October and March, we probably don't get enough sunlight. During the summer months, our bodies can produce more vitamin D. But it might be a good idea for somebody who's spending a lot of time indoors, for the elderly people, to have a closer look at their diet. Fortified dairy products, eggs and oily fish are good sources of vitamin D, but it might be worth talking about taking a supplement as well. Then if we move on to the next protein group of foods here, we have lean red meat and poultry and fish. And then of course we have eggs here as well, which are a great source of protein. And then all of the peas and beans and lentils and nuts, which again are particularly good, obviously a very important source for vegetarians. But even if you do eat meat, I think it's a good idea to try and include more vegetarian meals as well in the diet, because they tend to contain lots of peas and beans and lentils, really high in fiber. And again, you can add in lots of extra vegetables there too. So protein and iron would be the main nutrients that we get from these food groups here. As we get older, protein is important to have small amounts of protein at every meal. So maybe at breakfast time to have an egg, having a small amount of lean meat or chicken with our meals, or including the pulses as well is really important for protein. Portion size wise, we don't need to eat a huge amount. So for example, if you have the palm of your hand as a guide for portion size for protein, the palm of your hand, a piece of meat that size would actually be enough protein for the whole day. So we don't see people, luckily, running short of protein in the Irish diet. Another thing that's important to mention for good health is hydration. And I have a glass of water here because really we all should, start the day with a glass of water regularly during the day. We should be drinking up to about 2 litres for adult women during the day, a little bit less for children. And again, remember, you'll also get water from other drinks that you drink. So if you have a cup of tea, there's obviously going to be water in there as well. If you have a bowl of soup, there's going to be the water in that is going to be included. But do try and remember about hydration. It's really important for good health. Also, it's worth mentioning that alcohol is something that we often forget about when we're talking about good health and our diet, but it can be a large part of the diet for some people, and perhaps too much or an over-reliance on alcohol can then create an imbalance in the diet as well. So just remember that the guidelines are no more than 11 servings of alcohol a week for women and no more than 17 for men. And a unit or a serving in that instance is half a pint of beer, a small glass of wine, which would be the size that you might get in a restaurant, not probably what you might pour at home, which tends to be larger, and also 1 spirit. So they should be consumed not all on the one occasion, and certainly leaving 2 to 3 alcohol-free days in the week as well is a good idea. So I'm sure that there are probably things within all of that that I've just been talking about that we could all do with taking on board a couple of hints and tips. So I would encourage you to maybe start small steps, create a new habit around nutrition, and above all, be a little bit adventurous, eat loads of colour and enjoy your food.